Okay, so the next step, we've kind of broken down what commands are, but we need a little bit more understanding of how we use different data types, a bit more syntax, and also just how we also use an external editor. Okay, so this is just a little bit of a cleaning up episode, so you can skip forward if you already understand this stuff. But so what I'm going to start with is the fact that we don't always want to be coding in the program that we're using, right? So I don't want to be typing long scripts that go for days and days in my script editor. And what I actually, or where I want to be coding them is actually in an external script editor. So I personally, I use Notepad++. So you can pick many of them. I'm sure there are many you can use. I've been using Notepad++ for years. And again, just Google that, you'll find it. The great thing about Notepad++ as well is that it also has a language definition for MEL. So at least, someone has created one that enables us to, when we write code in Notepad, we can actually get all the formatting and all the correct stuff. So remember, if we're the only command we know so far is polysphere. Notepad knows that based on this definition. So I'm not going to go through how to install or how to go through it, but I think I know or at least I'll find, yeah, it is there. So if you either if I can be bothered to put it in the description, or you can kind of pause and find see that URL there. Actually, I'll copy it and yeah, I'll try to put it in the description anyway. But that's just the definition, the MEL definition for Notepad++. And again, the reason why we use that is because when we want to be typing and we want to be saving individual files, the script editor of a 3D program like this isn't really designed for that. If we're going beyond, say, running a few lines of code or just kind of testing out our stuff, we want to be starting to use an external editor, okay? But again, because we've got the language correct, right? So if the easiest thing to do is, see, I can actually write some code in here, polysphere, R 53.6 or 54.6, and then end that line. So yeah, I can grab that, copy that across, bam, okay? So you can see that, yeah, so what we do is, 54.6, right? So what we do is we write some code in here, we can copy it across, we can keep saving these files as well. So it just makes it much easier when we're using external editor, okay? So before we get into data types, I'm just gonna clear up a couple of syntax things. And just like using an external editor, there are a couple of things that we want to use when we're writing slightly longer bits of code, which are specifically comments. So comments are just a way of just typing some information that if I'm reading your code, I will read it and understand what you're doing, okay? So in MEL, the syntax for a single line comment rather, is 2 forward slashes. And then anything I write after that, this is a 1 line comment, done. Right, so you can see that it's, again, so in Notepad++, it understands that that's a comment because I've got the language installed. And yeah, so it's not going to be run. So if I copy that across as well, let's just overwrite. Oh, actually, no. So if I copy that into MEL, you can see that again, it's gone red. It understands that that's a comment. Okay, so this is all kind of important stuff. If I want a multi-line comment, that's going to be a / then a star. And it's going to end with a star, then another /. Okay, so this is a multi-line comment. And that just means that things, yeah, so let's say I put things multiple line. But is it? Yes, it is. Okay, so that just means that it has... So you can see that it's understanding that this isn't real. Yeah, and when I run that code, nothing happens, right? Because it knows that it is a comment, it is nothing. See, so I can run as many times as I want. It's not doing anything. Okay, so I mean, that's just basic syntax for our commenting. And we always want to comment our code just to make it kind of more understandable what we do, right? So now when I start to talk about some data or the data types and variables, we're going to want to actually comment that out, aren't we? So I'm going to write some code here. And so what's this code going to be? This code is going to be, okay, so what are the basic data types? And I'm going to ask myself that question. Right. So, what are they? I'm going to write another multi-line code, or multi-line comment rather, and I'm going to answer that question. The basic data types are an integer, a float, and a string. So we came across all three in the last lesson, right? We were able to, within the flags, the polysphere, we're able to use all three different data types. And again, so let's go into a little bit more explanation of what they are. And I explained them last time, but we'll just expand on that. An integer, a whole number. A float is not a whole number, so it's pretty much just might as well call it decimal. And I mean, the whole reason it's called a float is, I mean, it does have reasons for that, and the ways in which a number is actually evaluated to certain decimal points. But in the end, we can just think of it as something that is pretty much infinitely complex. Well, almost infinitely complex, but let's just think of it that way, right? And then a string is just a collection of characters. So, e.g., a name, or whatever. So, really profound stuff I'm doing here, right? So, these are the main data types that we're going to be using when we're doing basic coding in Maya and MEL, okay? So, using that, or knowing that, yes, of course, we can use these numbers, like when we, again, so if I... 6, 30, blah, blah. Oh, 4,000. Oh, that'll crush my mind. There we go. So we can use them in different ways. We're using a float there for the radius, and then an integer for the axis. But there are also ways sometimes that we want to use them, or pretty much all the time, that we want to define these data types in other ways, or like say, declare a variable, right? So that came out of the blue, but declaring a variable means that I'm giving a certain value of a certain data type a name, right? Okay, so the way that we do that is, let's just start, because you'll get it in a second, and we're going to start by declaring what kind of variable it's going to be. So what are our basic data types? Is an integer, a float, or a string. So I'm going to start with an int. So I'm going to go int. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm telling Maya what this variable is going to be. It's going to be an integer, right? So then we tell it what the name of the variable is going to be. And so what we do is we put a $, and then we type the name of the variable. Okay, so I'm just going to call it, whole number. Yeah, I mean, usually you're going to use things like X and Y and all kinds of different variables, but making something as well just as understandable as possible is useful too, right? So what I'm telling Maya is I have this number, or I have this variable, which is an integer, because I've told it, okay, so I'm starting with an integer. It's going, anything that comes after this, it's going to be an integer, right? So the integer variable, so this variable now, I'm naming it something. So anything that comes after this $, I'm naming a new variable. This new variable, doubling back, is going to be an integer. I'm telling Maya that this variable here is going to be an integer, which means I better make it an integer, right? So it's going to equal 36. Bam, right? And remember, we want to end the line because we always end the line of code with a semicolon. There's nothing else here. We have this integer variable. So we have a variable called whole number. The $sign is telling us that we have a variable. We've already told Maya that it's an integer, and we've given it a value. So again, an integer has to be a whole value, and so it's 36. Okay? Now, so the next data type, let's go, it's a float. So we need a new variable, which is going to be a float. When you go decimal, right? So we've got a number that we know is going to be a float, or sorry, a variable we know it's going to be a float because we've told it is. We've called the name. The name doesn't matter again. I can call it whatever I want. I can call it turkey if I wanted to. But anything, so we know that this number is going to be a float because I've told it is. And now I need to give it a value. And it's a float value. So it's going to be 3.141593. Let's be nerdy and make it pi. Okay, so you can see there that we've got an integer, which is a whole number. We named it. We've got a float, which is a decimal, named it. And then our third data type is a string. So again, I'm going to define the kind of variable this is going to be. It's going to be a string. My $sign is going to tell it that this is going to be the name of that variable. And that's going to be, I'm just going to call it name. So again, this can be anything. It's a collection of characters. And what we do is with strings, we put them inside quotation marks. And I usually put the quotation marks first and end the line, so I don't really, it's just better practice so I don't actually accidentally kind of screw up my code. Just make sure everything's fixed before I do anything else. Anyway, this name is going to be, this is a string. Okay. Or actually, instead, let's think about it differently. Like last lesson, we used the flags to create the name of the object. Let's actually put that. Let's store that name in a variable. So we go geo underscore sphere 01. Right. Okay. So I'm just going to delete this code within my Maya script. So I can copy this across into Maya and run it. And you can see nothing happens. And that's fine because nothing really is happening. What is happening is we're just defining these variables as different values. Okay? So you would have heard of this before, and if you've done any basic coding, you'll know that there's, in all languages, there is a print function. Okay? And the MEL is no different. Okay? So if I go print, and then within brackets, and I'm going to end that line again. So remember, we just end the line with the semicolon. What print does is it's going to, whatever I put in here, it's going to return the value of it or return whatever it is, right? So let's say, because I've defined these variables, I can just go, I can copy a whole number. I can copy it in there and only run this bit of code. And you can see it's printed 36. Because I've already defined the value of this variable as 36, I now know when I print this value or this variable, it's going to be 36, right? And let's change that. Let's print decimal. Right, 3.141593, fine. So, I mean, it really understands, right? So it's stored these values within these variables, okay? And print is always just something to remember because you're going to be using it like all the time because it's just something to be able to visually tell you what the value of something is. Or even, I mean, it might be the value of some kind of operation, right? So, okay, so I can go print decimal plus whole number. Right? So what's that going to do? That hopefully is going to print us out 39.141593. Let's see if it does. And what have we got? Oh, there we go. That is a very good thing to see. You can see that whole number is an undeclared variable. I got an error. Why is that? Because capitals are very important. Right? Bam. See, so I can I can actually do operations on my variables. All right, so we're just going to be using them so much. This is just pretty much just a definition of how we can start to use our basic data types, okay? So now though, I'm just going to swap over back to my notepad, and I want to use these variables in a command, right? So what's the only command that we know? All we know is polysphere. So I'm going to go polysphere. And what do we know about polysphere? We know what flags it has, right? So I'm going to start with -r, so that's the radius. So what's the radius going to be? Now, I'm going to set the radius, because we know that the radius can be set to a float, so it can be set to a length number. I'm going to set my radius to the variable I've already defined. So I'm going to set, instead of putting a number in there, I'm going to put the variable in there. Right? So that is because this variable equals that number, I can actually set this flag to that number based on the fact that this variable is that number. Okay? So my radius, I'm going to make it the decimal. Let's make our, so -sx, and I can also look at my right-hand side here for reference. Everything's already still up there. So those are my subdivisions in the axis. I'm going to turn that to, or set that to whole number. And you can see also what's great about having an external script editor is that it actually wanted to fill that for me as well, right? So see it's actually kind of giving me options here. So, and again, so I just want to make both axes, I want to make both axes equal, and they're both going to be 36. And then my name, remember what a name can be? A name can be a string. So what have I got up here? I've got a string, and that's name. So when I run this command, what's going to happen is I haven't typed in any numbers myself. Let's copy this across to Maya. Right. So these are, right, no, we don't need to, we're not really redeclaring, but yeah, that's fine. These were already declared. That's all good. I'm just triple checking that they do. And if we run this, what's going to happen? Bam. So you can actually see, because we've kept the history on, you can see that we've got 36 subdivisions on the axis, which is a whole number here. We've got a radius of 3.141592, which is a float here. And then we've got a name, which is geosphere01. So we determined those values based on our basic data types and storing them in variables. Okay, so I mean, just go through that again and again and again until you kind of understand. And like, let's actually change that, right? So let's change our whole number to, let's change it to 3, right? Instead of 36, change to 3. So I'm going to change the value of whole number. You can see that my result there is 3. Let's run that code again. All right, so it's using the value of my variable, which I can change at any time, to change whatever I want within the command. All right, so I do the same thing with my radius. I'll just make my radius 1 now, and I might change change that to 10 or something, and geo new sphere instead. And just gonna make sure, just gonna update the values. So I'm just running the code. You can see that I'm running the code to update the value of each variable. And then I'm going to run this line again. Bam. So you can see name is geosphere new, radius of 1, and both my axes, my subdivision axes, are 10 and 10, which is what I have for the int. Okay, so that's exactly how we really want to start using variables, because eventually they're going to become incredibly important. Okay, but that's a good place to stop that one, and thank you.